Welcome back to Kevin Navigate. Today is an awesome day. It's a special day for me because it's a date day. Yes, I am headed to go snowboarding with my wife. Both of our kids are in school. They don't get the day off. We do. She's a teacher, so we're driving up to the mountain right now, and we've just been chatting about life, plans, and everything else. We just happen to be talking about some financial stuff. I'm going to sit here and talk the perspective of my wife as a teacher. She's been a government employee her whole working career. A lot of the things that I take for granted and the knowledge that I know is much different from her. Some of the stuff is coming directly from her, and I know we spend a lot of times talking about complex things, and I try to make it very simple so she understands them, and here we go. One of the first things that we started talking about was she's got a friend of hers that's a teacher. The uncle was giving her coworker at work a sum of money, and she was asking Lindsay what she thought the best thing to do with the money would be. So Lindsay came home and she asked me what I thought, and I said, well, I don't know her financial situation. I said, but one of the things that I would do is I would look at whatever her highest interest rate was, either on a credit card. Does she have credit card debt? What kind of rate she's paying interest on that credit card, or car loans? Get some more information from her. And she said she's really going to investing the money in something. Well, that's great, but you can never invest at the rate at which, let's say, a common credit card is. For example, a common credit card now is somewhere between 20 to 30% interest rate. That means that if you were to invest the money into an investment, one, you have to outpace inflation. Let's just say inflation is at 3%, and then the money that you owe is being charged 20 to 30%. So that means the bare minimum that you'd have to earn on an investment would be 22 to 32%, which is very unlikely unless you are a trader and you're active and you know how to use maybe leverage, which would be options or something like that, to get a higher return. But we're not talking about that level of an investor. So my recommendation would be to start paying off the highest credit card that she had with the lowest balance. Because if you try to tackle the high credit card debt with a high balance, it's almost psychological, because money is so psychological. It always feels really good when you get something paid off. If you could take a baby step and let's say you owe a couple $1,000s on a 20% credit card and you get it paid off and you don't put that back on the card, it feels really good. And then tackle the next one, you kind of baby step it. That's the first question that we really were talking about. Another thing that we were talking about was the Trump presidency. I love talking about Donald Trump. There's a lot of things I like about him. There's a lot of things I don't like about him. The majority of my time is spent in and around construction. When Trump came into president, before he actually was inaugurated, the construction market went crazy. It just took off. It was like dumping the most flammable liquid on a fire. It was immediate. After the results came out, we just went wide open. Lindsay has been hearing me talk about how things have slowed down over the last year in the residential and commercial markets, how it's not been very good. If you look at housing starts, if you look at houses under contract, you look at canceled contracts, you look at all the metrics, all the data out there on real estate and commercial occupancies, it's not great. And if you look around the world, if you look at China, how their real estate market is imploding and crashing now, doesn't necessarily mean that the house prices are crashing, because that's not the case. We're in a little bit of a weird time because we are back to 19 level of home sales. The price of the average home has actually increased by 6% over the past year, which is counterintuitive what you would think. You would think that if there's not as many homes selling, if the contract for those houses are not being executed, for example, in the month of December, the most contracts ever canceled in the real estate market ever took place in the month of December. So there's a lot of people that thought it was a good idea and then reevaluated and said, nope, not doing it. You go back and you look at with interest rates, we were talking about how you hear in the news Trump wants interest rates immediately to be cut, and there's a disconnect because the Federal Reserve does not control interest rates. They control a short-term rate, which is called the overnight lending rate, the federal funds rate, which is basically a rate for bank, what they earn on interest on an overnight basis. That has very little effect on what the interest you pay on your credit cards, your car, your home loans, any type of debt. That rate is set by the bond market. For example, if we go back and look in September when the Federal Reserve started cutting rates on the federal funds rate, which is that overnight bank lending rate, every long-term or every rate, house interest rate, cars, credit card, has all gone up significantly since the federal funds rate was cut. We were talking geopolitics, we were talking about Trump and how she thought now that he's president, everything's gonna be great, we're gonna go back to what it was like in 2016. That's not the case because he has very little control over any of that narrative. And the bond market is ginormous. In fact, the bond market is times larger than the stock market. One of the things that most people don't understand is that a bond is much trickier than a stock because it has a pricing element and it has an interest rate element. So what happens is when the price of a bond goes up, the interest rate goes down. When the price of that bond goes down, the interest rate goes up. So what's happening in our economy at the moment is, and this is why Trump hasn't had the Trump bump effect or things aren't accelerating the way, and that's why I think he's throwing a little bit of a temper tantrum to slow down and make interest rates go lower, is because there is no control there. Because the debt in which our past administrations, we have a $35 to $36 trillion worth of debt. 12 to 15 trillion dollars of that debt comes due in 2025. Means that it has to be, they're not going to pay it off. They don't have the money to pay it off. If they do pay it off, which means they print money, that means inflation is going to go through the roof. That means if they print more money, there's more dollars out there chasing the same number of goods, which means that the price goes up. The Fed is trying to control that by not having that happen. If you have 12 to 15 trillion dollars that was short-term debt, that we still owe that money and it's got to be refinanced. It's like refinancing a house or a car or anything else. Now we're going to refinance the debt that we had out there, that 12 to 15 trillion refinance. Instead of refinancing it at 2 or 3%, the current rate is 4.5 or 5.5%. It's going to cost the country more money to refinance it. So what that means is the price element of those bonds goes down and the rate element has gone up. That is counter to what people are thinking are happening in the economy. It's a complex thing. There's a lot of moving things going to it. I just thought it's always great. I love my wife and I love spending time with her. I'm so excited that we're going snowboarding, but just to have a conversation about it, and then she understands things very well and comprehensive. She's asking about DOGE on government agencies and programs. Is that something that could really happen? I don't know. There's a lot of that can happen, but then you have to look at unemployment. How does that affect? We're outside of DC, so we are an area that has a lot of government employees. We are usually insulated from the rest of the country because there's so many government employers and government contractors. One thing that Trump did do, he eliminated or suspended for 90 days all basically aid to Ukraine and external governments throughout the world, which is crazy when you think about it. Basically, he just cut the check rating off to all these countries, which is a great thing. DOGE is something that hopefully we will become more efficient as a government. Historically, it doesn't happen. Something that we're just going to have to watch and see. I think it's good intended, but the practical purposes is going to be something that you're just going to sit back and grab a box of popcorn, just watch and see what happens.